Dr. Aaron D'Souza wants athletes to openly and honestly get on the juice.
High-level sport where doping is allowed.
D'Souza's Enhanced Games hope to launch in December 2024 with athletes competing in track and field, swimming, weightlifting, gymnastics, and combat sports.
The Enhanced Games would allow athletes under clinical supervision to take substances currently banned.
The new Enhanced Games would allow athletes to use performance-enhancing drugs.
Kia ora, I'm Gwen McClure, and today on The Detail, the Olympics on steroids. We're talking about Enhanced, the sporting event where athletes can take whatever they want. It's a direct contradiction to traditional elite sport, where anything that can enhance performance is banned. That includes anabolics, peptide hormones, growth factors, stimulants, narcotics. The list goes on. The Games are the brainchild of billionaire Aaron D'Souza and are backed by co-founder of PayPal and sort of New Zealander Peter Thiel. This might sound like a joke, but D'Souza isn't kidding.
It's absolutely not a gimmick. We're extremely serious.
And he's not the only person to take it seriously.
Look at James Magnussen in lane 4 in the gold cap. He's well placed here. This is the part of the race where he's earned his nickname, the Missile.
Australian swimmer James Magnussen was the first guy to put his hand up. He's a two-time Olympian and world champion.
He's going to turn it on like he never has before. Magnussen the Magnificent. He's become the first Australian to win this coveted title. Oh, the torpedo has been superseded by the Missile.
Walk me through how you decided to join Enhanced.
I was on a podcast, somewhat satirical podcast, sports podcast here in Australia, and we were talking about the potential athletes that could come on board the Enhanced Games and break world records. And I half jokingly, half serious said, for $1 million, I'd go on board and break a world record in the 50 freestyle at the Enhanced Games.
What about this, boys? How about I'll give you an exclusive here on the show.
Love it.
If they put up $1 million for the 50 freestyle world record, I'll come on board as their first athlete. I'll juice to the gills and I'll break it within 6 months.
I didn't think much more of it, but the next morning when I woke up, that offer had been accepted, or I guess entertained, and the Aaron D'Souza and the guys at the Enhanced Games said, we'll put $1 million US in escrow for you to come on board and swim at the Enhanced Games to break the world record.
What was the draw for you?
Well, I've been retired for 5 years, so there's a couple of things that are appealing for me. The first thing is, as a 32-year-old now, I sometimes sit back and think, I wonder what I could have achieved with 32-year-old mind in a 20-year-old body. And, most other athletes I speak to echo that sentiment. It would be great to have the wisdom, the perspective on life, the hindsight of a person in their 30s in the body of their 20-year-old self, when you could basically conquer the world physically, but were so immature and unexperienced mentally. So that's the ability to jump back in as an athlete, even if it's just for a year or two, and push myself physically and mentally, and have a better understanding of how the whole process works with, the hindsight of an entire 10-year career behind me is really exciting. Physically, I'm really excited about the potential to swim faster than anyone has in history. That's very enticing for me. It won't be a legitimate world record. Obviously, we're not comparing it to the actual world record. It's not going to be written in books, but we're aiming to do the fastest swim in history, which is really exciting. And then probably the third and final part of that, in that order as well, is the monetary part.
The drugs he uses won't necessarily be steroids.
That may be one of the things. I mean, there's heaps of things out there. What I'll be doing is doing tests with doctors and seeing what my current levels are at for different biological markers, and where those things can either be improved or in places enhanced. But I think steroids is a somewhat antiquated term that is broadly overarching and not necessarily accurate in this circumstance.
So you're saying that you might not even touch steroids?
It depends. It depends on what my body is, when where my current levels are at of different hormones and different biological markers, what my body needs to swim faster. But steroids is like a broad overarching term that doesn't necessarily accurately describe what's available for athletic performance.
He's talking about a category called PEDs, performance-enhancing drugs. According to Dr. Thomas O'Connor, who treats people who use or have used steroids, that can include a whole range of substances.
PEDs are varied. There's 100 PEDs. Steroids are just one of them now. Peptides, insulin, secretagogues, growth factors, SARMs, SERMs, diuretics, thyroid preparations. I mean, IGF, I can go and go and go and go. It's just going to be a laundry list this day and age.
So are there some supplements and treatments in this space that can both improve performance and be safe?
Sure, absolutely.
So your area of expertise is treating people who do use or have used anabolic steroids and doing so in a non-judgmental way. Does that mean that you feel like steroid use is okay and healthy, or is it more about harm reduction?
Yeah, it's definitely not okay, quote unquote, and there will be consequences. We have these agents. Some of them are been around for 100 years, or I don't know, 1930s or something, coming on 100 years, and they're quite crude, like testosterone derived and anabolic androgenic steroids, which is the basic, right? They're still around today and they work. You're going to lose some hair. You're going to have your natural testosterone levels are shut down. If you're a man and you're young, and your testicles are going to shut off, you're going to have potential problems with infertility. If you do it long enough, you're going to need a doctor like me. Then it comes into the kidney and the heart, which is devastating, which doesn't happen overnight.
Regardless of the risks, and despite the ban on performance enhancers in sport, people are using them. And James says that includes Olympians.
I adhered to these rules and regulations my entire career. I was one of the most tested athletes in Australian history. There was times where I was being tested daily for 2 to 3 week periods, giving blood passports and urine samples daily, nightly, after training, before bed. So I adhered to those rules my entire career. But in saying that, during my career, I was well aware that there were athletes that were skirting those rules and countries that were doing the same.
When you say that there were athletes, are you talking about people you were competing with?
Yep.
So you're in a pool swimming against somebody you know has been taking banned substances.
Every Olympic athlete knows that they're competing against certain athletes that are cheating. Yeah, that's just part and parcel, I think, and why this is a really interesting concept, because some people say cheating, but cheating is actually already prevalent in clean sport. So this may be the first time in history there truly has been an even playing field where things are open and honest rather than done in the shadows.
We'll come back to James. For now, here's 3-time Olympic skeleton racer Ben Sanford. He served almost a decade on the Athletes Committee for WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency. He says fairness is one reason he's anti-doping, but not the only one.
You want to be able to line up next to an athlete, that's in a reasonably similar state to you. You don't want it to become a competition of who's got the best pharmacists and the best doctors. There's also the health part of it, which is often overlooked. Like, we're not talking about therapeutic use of performance-enhancing drugs. We're talking about someone who is otherwise a healthy athlete taking something to gain an advantage. And there's no technical limit to what you can do in that space. And like, we've seen the terrible health consequences that's had on athletes. And the other thing is that athletes in the space are role models. And you're also, to a certain degree, setting the standards for how people get into the sport and get involved in the sport. And I think it's a terrible image to set to say, to parents around the world that if you want your child to succeed in sport, then they need to be doping.
What are you hearing from other athletes and other coaches at the elite level? Very
little. No one's really talking about this. It's not on people's radars at the moment. Like obviously the Enhanced Games is out there promoting themselves. They've picked up, I think, a couple of retired athletes, but most athletes and most coaches are pretty focused on doing what they do and preparing for their next event. Trying to get the most out of their training and get ready for their competitions. They're not worried what's happening, out in this sort of alternative universe where billionaires are throwing money at retired athletes to try and break world records.
There's such a stigma attached to doping. Do you think it will be easy for Enhanced to find enough people to do this anyway?
I'm sure they'll find enough people. I just don't know that they'll find the people of the caliber that they're after, and I would be very surprised if they find current athletes. Like if you're an athlete, let's say competing in athletics, this would really be sort of an end of career type of decision, because you're going to be in the Enhanced Games. By definition, you are going to be doping. If you're into the jurisdiction of, world athletics, then they have every right to test you when you're with the Enhanced Games. And so you could still get tested. You could get banned from, future athletics competitions. You might get to compete in the Enhanced Games, but you would be, likely to be banned from any other sport that comes under the World Anti-Doping Code.
I know that you're not a medical professional, but you have been involved in WADA for a long time. So can you talk about why steroids are dangerous and what the risks are?
Yeah. And this is often overlooked. We're not talking about therapeutic use. There's a huge range of medical issues and dangers associated with their use. And some of these dangers aren't immediately apparent. Some of them, can have really long-term consequences. And we saw, during the days of East Germany, there's a famous female, I think she's a German shot putter, her coaches and support staff gave her so much testosterone that she transitioned into being a male and now lives her life as a male.
Andreas Krieger used to be Heidi Krieger. She was the women's European shot put champion in 1986.
At 21, she was one of East Germany's star athletes, but her success had been built on a diet of drugs.
When I turned 16, my coach started giving me pills.
There's all sorts of reports, when there was a lot of doping in the Tour de France of cyclists taking so much EPO that they had to get up in the middle of the night to walk around the house to keep their hearts beating because their blood was so thick.
Some breaking news now on Lance Armstrong. The global governing body of cycling has just announced moments ago it will ban Armstrong for life and strip him of his 7 tour titles.
Yes or no? Did you ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
Yes or no? Was one of those banned substances EPO?
Yes.
Did you ever blood dope or use blood transfusions to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
Did you ever use any other banned substances like testosterone, cortisone, or human growth hormone?
Yes.
It was giving them performance enhancing effects, but it was also killing them. Like athletes were literally dying. And we also see, coming out of the 1980s with some of the heavy steroid use in some sports, a lot of those athletes, didn't survive a huge amount of time beyond the 1980s. So, there's really, really severe medical consequences for athletes. There is a duty of care that you would expect of anyone who's holding a sporting event. And if they have these incentives to encourage athletes to dope, there's obviously a risk for those athletes, and there's also a risk for the wider sporting environment that more people will see this and believe that they can do that as well, and probably be doing it without the care and diligence that these athletes might be afforded.
The whole point of this is to watch athletes perform superhuman feats, really. Do you think that's even going to work? Do you think that we're going to see athletes smashing records?
Yeah, it's really distilling down, it's taking away the sport from the sport. And that's part of what bothers me about this. It really is just taking advantage of people for entertainment's purpose. It's producing a spectacle without the competition. I looked on something on Twitter yesterday, and there was some runner that was saying that, he can run faster than Usain Bolt because he's enhanced. And well, that's very well, but you're not even competing in the same race, mate. Like you're out there doping and getting all enhanced, and here's someone who's got there through hard work and dedication, and they're two different things. Like, they're not comparable. Like, we have world records that are, in athletics and running, for example, that are broken, but they're wind assisted. So then they're not world records. Like, these people are going to be breaking actual world records, but they're not actually going to be breaking them. Like, then I don't think anyone's going to turn around and say, oh yeah, that's a new world record because you ran, 9.2 seconds because you've doped for the last 18 months. Like, what world record is that? It's a record in your own social media feed.
Olympic officials have left no doubt as to what they think about an enhanced games.
US anti-doping agency CEO Travis Tygart described it as a dangerous clown show.
Olympic great and Australian Sports Commission chief Kieran Perkins says if doping is allowed to go ahead, the event will be, quote, borderline criminal. He says sport shouldn't turn its back on athletes contemplating taking part, and they should be protected from making poor decisions.
I do think the idea of an enhanced games is laughable. The reason why drugs in sport was outlawed and banned is because a cyclist fell off a bike and died. Not because we were embarrassed that someone looked too big or performed too fast, or we felt like there was, some underlying pharmacological advantage that we didn't like another person getting. Someone died. Someone will die if we allow that sort of environment to continue to prosper and flourish.
The other thing is that I think one of the appeals of sport is that you can put yourself in those situations. Like, you can see the path that the athlete has taken to get there, and that's the appeal of the Olympics. And that's why the Olympics inspires kids around the world to get involved in sport and to try and follow their dreams, is because they can see their role models doing this, and they can believe that they might be able to do that as well.
Let's go back to swimmer James Magnuson. I asked him what it's been like telling other people he's going to take performance enhancers.
Amongst other athletes, it's always been a really positive response. I think athletes like myself view it as a really interesting opportunity, either post-career or later in their career. For some of them, maybe even as an alternative to their current career. And athletes are always at the cutting edge of technology, supplements, science, medicine. And whilst we are tested, we're never pushing the boundary in terms of prohibited substances, but we always are aware of what's out there. And so I think athletes are the easiest part of society to understand this project. Probably some of the harder ones are maybe people that are a little bit older, a little bit well-researched, or don't quite understand what the games are doing and the science and the medicine behind it. For most people, once you talk to them and explain that anything that is taken for the games and during the games has to be FDA approved and prescribed by a doctor, and that the enhanced games themselves has an extensive medical team on board already that you can see through their website, but I'll also be seeking medical advice from people within my own camp. Once people understand that part of it, I think it alleviates a lot of the concerns.
You run a swim school, is that right?
I do swim clinics, yeah.
So how has the reaction been from parents, especially of those young athletes?
I think when it comes to the point of athletes as role models for children, there's always a responsibility on the parent to articulate to that child what parts of athletic performance that they should model their own lives on and aspire towards. So, for example, if my kid sits down with me and watches Formula One, it's up to me to tell that child not to go out on the road and drive at 300 kilometers an hour. That's for the confines of professional sport. However, the dedication, the sacrifice, the training that those athletes exhibit, that is very relevant as something that you can aspire to and someone that you can use as a role model. I'm going to be making sacrifices. I'm going to be training hard. I'm going to be at the peak of athletic performance, which are all perfectly fine aspirational traits. But at the end of the day, this is a project. This sits in professional sport, even maybe slightly outside professional sport, and that's not for kids. So that's a distinction that the parents have to articulate with their children.
But it's still, I mean, if you go and smash records and every athlete at this competition smashes the records that are existing, it does still give the message that to be the very best in the world, you have to take supplements and drugs.
No, I don't believe so, because we won't be winning Olympic medals, world championship medals. This sits outside of that. So these won't be recognized world records. They won't be in the genuine history books as world records. They'll be the fastest swims in history. Yeah, no doubt. And I'm pretty confident that they will be the fastest swims in history, the fastest runs in history. But this is a new pursuit. This is a new frontier. This is something different to anything that's been done before.
There's no date or location set for the Enhanced Games, but it's more than just an idea. The backing money is in place, and organizers hope the event will happen by early next year. Unless Kieran Perkins, also a swimmer and Olympic gold medalist in 92 and 96, is right.
So, very silly, and I doubt it'll get up.
That's it for today. The Detail is funded through RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This podcast was engineered by Jeremy Ansell and produced by Alexia Russell. Thanks to Ben Sanford, James Magnuson, and Dr. Thomas O'Connor. I'm Gwen McClure. Ka kite.